Over the course of MLB history, very few players have been as hyped up as Alex Rodriguez. Most players would crumble under that sort of pressure, but Rodriguez managed to defy the odds and succeed. He was so good in Seattle that by the time he hit free agency, he had already had 3 40 home run seasons and was able to sign the highest paying contract in the history of the MLB. Unfortunately for Rodriguez, however, in his time in Texas, the Rangers were able to do pretty much nothing with him, so he requested a trade. Boston came immediately to the front of the pack, and a trade was orchestrated. The trade would send Manny Ramirez and a young prospect named John Lester to Texas for A-Rod, and Nomar Garciaparra going to the White Sox for Miguel Ordonez and Brandon McCarthy. The only problem was that for the trade to happen, Rodriguez had to agree to lower his salary. He agreed to it, but the MLBPA did not. They vetoed the trade, and the deal was off. And a short time later, he was traded to the Yankees instead. But what if it didn't happen? What if the MLBPA didn't veto the Red Sox trade in the first place, giving the Yankees a shot? Well, as you're about to find out, everything changes. So how are you guys doing? My name is Zach, and yes, today we will be doing What If Alex Rodriguez Got Traded to the Boston Red Sox. I hope you guys enjoyed. This video took me so long to do. And if you did enjoy, please make sure to like and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. Now, this of course will be a long video because Alex Rodriguez had a very long career. So we start off in the 2004 season where Alex Rodriguez has the worst season of his career so far. His 7.6 WAR is the lowest of his career so far, and Maglio struggles with injuries, but in the end, it doesn't really matter, as A-Rod and Maglio are still enough to help them win the division. Down in the AL West, Manny Ramirez's bat is enough to help Texas get into a game 163 in Anaheim. They win the game, but in the ALDS, the Red Sox are just too much. Boston again advances to the World Series, and again they play St. Louis. In the series, adding one of the best bats of the generation proves huge, as behind the bats of A-Rod and David Ortiz, the Red Sox win in 6 games to earn their first World Series title in 86 years. We've already been through a bunch, but now we head into the offseason. In this offseason, Edgar Renteria signs with San Francisco, Maglio re-signs with Boston, Omar Vizquel signs with Kansas City, and now we are ready for the 2005 regular season. This year, Maglio Ordonez struggles with injuries again for the second straight year, but Sox fans are not complaining at all, as on the back of 48 home runs from one Alex Rodriguez, the Red Sox cruise to 100 wins. Those wins come at the expense of the Yankees, who are beginning to really miss A-Rod. This means that Boston runs away with the AL East, but the playoffs end up staying pretty much the same, with the White Sox winning the 2005 World Series. We now head into the 2006 offseason and the 2006 draft, where we see our first draft changes so far. As in 2005, the Tigers without Maglio won 1 extra game, which means the Dodgers jump the Tigers in the draft order, which means Andrew Miller becomes a Dodger. And a pick later, Clayton Kershaw goes to the Tigers, which, yes, that means that both of the 2011 Cy Young winners will be on the same team. Looking ahead to the 10th pick, the Diamondbacks and the Giants swap picks, which means that Max Scherzer will be a Giant and Tim Winsicombe will be a D-back. None of this matters yet, though, because now we have to head into the 2006 season. This is a season where we see Edgar Renteria become an all-star and help the Giants get at least close to the 500 mark. The results of this change we will get to in a minute, because this is the season where the Cardinals somehow make the playoffs off an 83-win season, and then somehow carry that momentum to beat the Tigers for the 06 World Series. In the offseason, Julio Lugo signs with the Blue Jays, and in the draft, Omar Vizquel won the Royals a few extra games, so they moved down, meaning that Mike Moustakas will be a Chicago Cub, while Matt Wieters falls in the Royals' lap at 5. We have to slide down to the 10th pick for the next change, where Edgar Renteria's extra wins actually cost the Giants, as they no longer have the 10th pick. That's with the Mariners, which means Madison Bumgarner will now be a Mariner. This brings us to the 2007 season, the year where the Boston Red Sox go off. This year, nobody can seem to get A-Rod out, as he goes for 54 home runs, while Miguel Ordonez and David Ortiz aren't that far off either, hitting 35 homers apiece, as Boston walks over everybody on the way to a staggering 115-win season. Behind them, we see a plummet from the Yankees, who struggle to even break the 500 mark without the production of A-Rod. This obviously means that ownership is not at all happy, but back in the NL, it ends up being the Colorado Rockies who roll everybody on the way to the World Series. They will represent the NL in that series, where they have the honor of being absolutely murdered by the Boston Red Sox, as A-Rod becomes the league and World Series MVPs. Looking to the offseason, the Rangers are tired of losing, so they decide to trade Edison Volquez and Danny Herrera to the Reds for a recovering addict by the name of Josh Hamilton. This will be massive, but down in LA, it's the Dodgers who are able to trade for Miguel Cabrera because they're the ones who have Andrew Miller. But now we can head to the draft, where
the Florida Marlins select Gerald D. Posey.
Yes, Buster Posey will be forced to waste most of his prime as a member of the Florida Marlins. And down at pick 10, the Giants snatch up Jason Castro, who is a pretty good backup plan, but not at all Buster Posey. But their draft is not nearly as bad as free agency is for the Yankees, as Jorge Posada sees the ship sinking and decides to sign with the crosstown New York Mets. The ship keeps going down as Andy Pettitte decides to retire, and a furious Yankees front office tries to make a big move. They decide that Andrew Jones is the answer. They are wrong. But this takes us to the 2008 regular season, where we have a few top teams that we will talk about later. Because down in the NL West, Tim Lincecum puts together a dream season, winning the Cy Young and putting the team on his back to the tune of 89 wins and a division title. On the other end, the Giants plummet, ending up with the worse record than the Orioles, who are in the middle of a rebuild. As for the winners, the Rangers nearly make the playoffs behind a rookie John Lester, while it's the Red Sox who top the West winning Angels for the AL's top seed, winning 102 games, led by Alex Rodriguez, who, as the best player on the best team in the AL, is named to his second straight AL MVP. Back over on the National League side, it's the Philadelphia Phillies who end up being the story of the NL, putting together a solid 92-win season, meeting up in the NLCS with the Arizona Diamondbacks. They go on to win the series, meaning that we will have a Phillies versus Red Sox World Series. And in a series that goes all 7 games, it's the Philadelphia Phillies who, led by an MVP performance from Cole Hamels, are able to pull out the 2008 World Series. Which brings us to the famous 2009 MLB Draft, where we actually start out at the 17th overall pick, because the way things fall, this pick now belongs to the Blue Jays, which means that A.J. Pollock will now be playing north of the border for the Toronto Blue Jays. That's not what you're here for though, because
26th selection of the 2009 first-year player draft, the Seattle Mariners select Michael Trout.
You want to talk about a steal? The Mariners just paired Mad Bum and King Felix with Mike Trout. Good luck facing that team in a few years. But now we look at the rest of the 2009 offseason, where Mark Teixeira sees what's happening in the Bronx and decides that's not for him. But there is another team in the AL East that looks very appealing. So Teixeira again unites with A-Rod, but this time in Boston. Meanwhile, in other news, we have CC Sabathia re-signing with Milwaukee, as he stays to try to run it back, and Manny Ramirez does the same, making Texas look like a serious title contender for years to come now. Texas is looking very good, and that's great, but now we head into the 2009 regular season. This is the year where Alex Rodriguez admits that he took steroids from 2001 to 2003. This hurts his reputation a lot, and then he gets hurt for most of the 2009 season. Even with that though, the Red Sox are still utterly stacked, so they still managed to run away with the AL East. Checking out the rest of the majors, it is again the Angels who win the AL West. Although in this season, they end up not being the only team from their division to make the playoffs, as Texas with Manny back manages the 3rd best record in the AL. The Rangers will actually be able to ultimately make the ALCS this year. In that series, series, they play Boston, who is just simply too much. They are even more loaded with A-Rod back and look to wreak havoc on whoever comes out of the NL. Speaking of the NL, last year's Cinderella team, the Diamondbacks, absolutely plummet. And just a year after making the NLCS, they fail to even reach 75 wins, as Tim Winsicombe gets his second Cy Young stolen by CC Sabathia. Again though, it's the Phillies who top the NL, meaning that 2009 will feature a rematch of 2008, as the Phillies again match up with Boston, but this year, the Red Sox have become ridiculously loaded. There is nobody beating the Red Sox this year, so they end up taking the rematch over Philly. With the new decade comes some new moves, as Adrian Beltre signs with the Rangers a year early, while John Lackey and Matt Holliday still go to the same place, and Jason Bay re-signs with the Red Sox. The first draft of the decade also gives us some big changes, as the Diamondbacks move down a pick, saving them from drafting a complete bust, so instead they end up with a few years of a bona fide ace in Matt Harvey. While down at pick 23, the Giants finally get some luck, and end up with a future MVP in Christian Yelich. Other than that though, the 2010 draft stays the same, so we can look to the 2010 regular season, aka the season where the Texas Rangers arrive. The rest of the AL powers kind of slip up this year, and the Rangers don't miss out on their chance, as they steamroll the Jays and the Rays on the way to the World Series. As for those teams who slipped up, the Angels and Red Sox have their worst seasons in a while, with the Red Sox barely reaching 500 as they begin to really miss first-time All-Star John Lester. Back to the winners, the Phillies again make it back to the World Series, this time to play Texas. And this year, the Phillies run into another buzzsaw, as the Rangers dominate, walking off Game 6 to win the first World Series of the new decade. Which brings us to the enormous 2011 offseason, where Texas again wins big, as Cliff Lee re-signs with Texas. While in San Diego, Adrian Gonzalez wants far more money than they're willing to pay him, so they start looking for trades. In the end, there's one suitor who sticks out. So in a history-changing deal, Adrian Gonzalez gets sent to the Chicago Cubs, with the return package being headlined around Starlin Castro and Matt Caesar. The other prize of the offseason is Carl Crawford, who gets his best offer and signs with the LA Angels. He pairs for the next 6 years in the outfield with Torrey Hunter, a deal that will go horribly wrong. In other news, the Rangers send Scott Feldman to Baltimore to get under the luxury tax, and Carlos Pena goes back to Tampa because Chicago no longer needs a first baseman. In this year's draft, the Yankees finally get a little bit of luck, as Javier Baez falls right into their lap at pick number 9. And Cubs fans, I know you love Baez, but the reason that he's available at 9 is that down at pick 8, the Cubs select Francisco Lindor, which means the Indians end up with Archie Bradley at 7, while the Mets end up with George Springer. And finally, at pick 14, Jose Fernandez, RIP, gets stolen by the Oakland A's. Finally though, we are in the actual season, and the story of this season ends up being the race for the AL Cy Young and MVP. As for the Tigers, Justin Verlander and Clayton Kershaw put together incredible seasons. And at the end of the day, it ends up being Clayton Kershaw who beats out his teammate for the Cy Young and MVP. The other Cy Young goes to Roy Halladay, who leads the Phillies to 102 wins, which is a number that's tied for top in the league with the Brewers. The biggest loser of this season has to be the NL West, as the Dodgers and Giants both again take huge hits to their record, both failing to make it to 500. With that being said, the Rangers again win 97 games and make the ALCS, where they meet up with the scary Detroit Tigers. In this series, both teams' pitching performs well, but Texas's lineup is stacked, so they advance to play the winner of the NL, which means that we have CC Sabathia leading the Brewers into Texas. This series will go on to show the dominance of this year's Texas Rangers, because they are able to handle the Brewers and win the World Series. As we get into the 2012 offseason, this one is pretty brief, as all that really happens is that Albert Pujols returns to St. Louis and Corey Seager goes to the Red Sox in the draft. After that very lengthy offseason, we can now head to the 2012 regular season, where we start with the Red Sox only winning 70 games, but the real story? That's the Seattle Mariners. As a Rookie of the Year Mike Trout, along with All-Stars Mad Bum and King Felix, lead the team to 91 wins and a wildcard game berth, with Mike Trout being named the AL MVP. The Mariners don't just settle for the wildcard game either, as they go on to win the ALDS and ALCS, advancing to play the Reds in the World Series. In the series, playoff Mad Bum goes off as he throws a complete game in Game 7, which carries the Mariners to win the World Series. Things are changing, and they keep changing in the 2013 draft, where Chris Bryant does not go to the Cubs, and instead, he will play out his career in the high altitudes of Colorado for the Rockies. As for that offseason, the 2012 Red Sox and Mark Teixeira both struggled big time, and the Red Sox have a prospect in the waiting named Anthony Rizzo, which means that Mark Teixeira's big contract is tradable. So Boston trades that contract, sending Teixeira back to the Rangers, receiving Michael Young in the process, and Josh Hamilton re-signs with the Rangers because he already won 2 World Series there. In the 2013 season, it is immediately clear the benefits of the Mark Teixeira trade, as the Red Sox lose 5 extra games without John Lester, but both them and the Rangers still win their divisions. Back down in Seattle, the reigning champs stumble out of the gates, and even an MVP performance from Mike Trout isn't enough to dig them out, as they do get to 88 wins, but that still leaves them just on the outside looking in. This leaves the ALCS to be a matchup between the Tigers and the Red Sox, and unfortunately for Boston, A-Rod is suspended for this series due to biogenesis, so the Tigers rotation dominates. They easily handle the Red Sox and advance to play the winner of the NLCS, a series that too is dominated, this time by King Albert Pujols, which means we will see a rematch of the 2006 series, but this time, the Tigers rotation dominates the Cardinals, keeping even Albert Pujols at bay, while the lineup steps up when the team needs it the most, as the team goes on to win in 6 games, with Anibal Sanchez, who threw a complete game shutout in Game 6, being named the 2013 World Series MVP, which takes us into the 2014 offseason, where in free agency, Robinson Cano decides to sign with the Mariners, and Jacoby Ellsbury follows him, creating an even more lethal lineup down in Seattle. They continue to bolster their roster, this time in the pitching rotation, as Seattle shores up that 3rd spot with Bartolo Colon, who the Mets replace with an old AJ Burnett. The actual 2014 season is at first headlined by the Washington Nationals, as even with Bryce Harper only playing in 100 games, the team still cruises to 97 wins and runs away with the NL East. This looks really good, but in the NLDS, the team chokes horribly, as they somehow get swept by the wildcard winning Pittsburgh Pirates. The Dodgers end up benefiting the most from this, winning the NL pennant, but back in the AL, there's one team and then everybody else, as Mike Trout's .307 average, 41 home runs, and 119 RBIs earns him his 3rd straight AL MVP. And this time, it's not for nothing, as with Cano, Ellsbury, Hernandez, and Bumgarner all also being named All-Stars, Seattle wins 103 games and destroys the Tigers in the ALCS, which means we will see Seattle face off against the LA Dodgers in the 2014 World Series. And this year, it's King Felix who dominates the closeout Game 6 as Seattle wins their 2nd World Series in 3 years. Things are going well in Seattle, and in Colorado, things are going pretty well too, because the Rockies land the 2nd pick and
the Colorado Rockies select Alex Bregman.
Bregman pairs with Brian and Arenado in Colorado, forming a loaded lineup and building a potential future dynasty. Meanwhile, down at pick 24, the Cardinals help the rotation with a young Walker Buehler. In free agency, Max Scherzer still goes to the Nationals because they are still a very good team, while down in Texas, John Lester does not re-sign with the Rangers and does not go to Chicago. Instead, John Lester heads out to Hollywood to play for the LA Dodgers. While down in Miami, Russell Martin signs with the Marlins to take over for Buster Posey. Yes, Martin is taking over for Posey, because both Posey and the Marlins agree they have no future together. So they trade Posey to the Twins to be their catcher, getting back a prospects package centered around Jose Barrios to make the Twins suddenly a very interesting team. Meanwhile, the Yankees are tired of being irrelevant, so they signed a washed-up Hanley Ramirez to a huge contract. The actual 2015 season shows just how good and valuable Buster Posey is, as on the back of his MVP season, the Twins are in the first wildcard spot, destroying the Rangers before losing to the Blue Jays in the ALDS. That Blue Jays team will actually beat the Royals in the ALCS to make it to the World Series. They will play the top dog of the NL. A season-long battle between the Cardinals and Dodgers for the top spot. In the end, the Cardinals end up easily taking the regular season with 104 wins. But when the two teams meet up in the NLCS, the Dodgers are able to return to the Fall Classic. This series is really a coin flip, and every game is determined by 2 runs or less. And unfortunately for Los Angeles, 4 of those 5 close games end up going Toronto's way, as clutch hitting in the middle of their order, ending with an Edwin Encarnacion walk-off home run in Game 5, means the Toronto Blue Jays win the World Series. And yes, since 2016 was the last season that A-Rod played, this will be the last season of the What If. And unfortunately, the 2016 draft doesn't see any really interesting changes, which means we can head straight into the 2016 offseason, where we see Chris Davis at least try to replace Albert Pujols in Los Angeles. His replacement in Baltimore is Steve Pearce, while meanwhile, down in the Bronx, the Yankees' next attempt to help turn them around is Jason Hayward, which, yes, leads us into the final season of this What If, where again, Mike Trout and the Mariners are ridiculous. They managed to easily roll to 103 wins, with Mike Trout earning his 4th MVP in the first 5 years of his career, while Madison Bumgarner earns the AL Cy Young. Meanwhile, down in Boston, the Red Sox are finally becoming Rizzo and Mookie Betts' team, as they and a Rookie of the Year Corey Seager lead the Red Sox into the playoffs. Joining them in the playoff picture is actually the New York Yankees, as a young Javi Baez leads the team to 90 wins and earns the 2nd wild card for their first playoff appearance in what seems like forever. The Yankees are actually not the most interesting story of this season though, as down in Colorado, around the halfway point of the season, they sit at around 500, while down in Minnesota, the Twins are in tank mode, which means they are willing to move on from Buster Posey. The Rockies have a logjam in their infield, so the Rockies send Trevor Story, John Gray, and Mark Reynolds to the Twins in exchange for Buster Posey, sandwiching Posey in the middle of an order that includes Blackmon, Bryant, Arenado, Carlos Gonzalez, Bregman, and DJ LeMahieu in the 7-hole. With this incredible lineup, the Rockies start to go on a run. They win 17 straight during the month of September, sneaking into the 2nd wild card behind Posey and their leader, an MVP Chris Bryant. They have to go into New York for the wild card game, beating the Mets and later going on to advance to the NLCS. They match up against the Dodgers in that series, and their bats handle their business to make it to the World Series. The team they will face is the winner of a Red Sox versus Mariners ALCS, and in this series the Red Sox are overmatched by the Mariners, so Seattle heads to their 3rd World Series so far of the Mike Trout era. This series is a bloodbath, going the distance all the way to a Game 7, but in this Game 7, the dominant bats of the Rockies lineup show up, taking Colorado to easily win Game 7 to earn their first World Series in franchise history. So there you go, what if A-Rod got traded to the Boston Red Sox? If you're still here, thank you so much for watching. This took me like 3 MLB The Shows to make, so it took a while. But anyways, have a great day and see ya.